Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, for wherever you are calling from. Welcome to this webinar. And this webinar is the third session in a series of 3 sessions. So, yeah, this is the last session. But of course, we're doing something special. And I think most of you already suspect something, because the past 2 sessions, Timothy always kicked off with this short little instruction and this short little introduction, and now it's me. So yes, we've switched roles. I had the pleasure of explaining the basics of Active Directory and showing how Active Directory and virtualization can go hand in hand. And now Timothy has the pleasure of explaining backing up and restoring Active Directory. And looking at the questions that you guys have asked earlier, I know this topic interests you a lot. So I won't eat out of the limited time that Timothy has. We've already went way over time in the last one. So I'll just be here gathering your questions, asking them to Timothy when he tries to catch a breath. Now, Timothy is a system engineer from Veeam in the Benelux. He has a passion for scripting, and he promised me we'll see lots of that. So Timothy, have fun.
Thank you, Sander. Thank you for doing the introduction. And he's absolutely right. I prepared some scripting for you guys, so I do hope that you will enjoy it. So Active Directory and Veeam, as Sander said, it's part of a 3-part session, so this is the 3rd episode. But actually in the past, we've already done this session. So in the past we did, we were discussing it earlier, but 3 years ago we did the same session. But back then it was Active Directory 2012. So I want to hit it off by first saying that now Microsoft has introduced Active Directory 2016, and I'm glad to say that Veeam is a very fast organization in supporting new products. So we already support 2016 operating system-wise, so you can install Veeam on 2016. You can back up virtual machines that are running 2016, but we also support all the applications, all our explorers for 2016. So Microsoft Active Directory, you can back it up, and you can even do item level recovery for 2016, as I will show you later. However, the only thing that you have to make sure, of course, is that you are running Availability Suite or Backup and Replication 9.5, because that is the version that supports that 2016. So starting with that, I want to start with the first topic, and that is backing up. So if you want to do good restores, you need to back up properly. Maybe that's the elephant in the room, but it's really important. So I want to start by answering a lot of questions we already saw during the previous webinars. So how do I back up Active Directory with Veeam? Well, first of all, before we talk about the configuration, know that Active Directory, it doesn't use a regular clock to sync with its peers in the same cluster or in the same forest or in the same domain, as it's called in Active Directory terms. It doesn't use a regular clock. No, what it does is it has an incremental value, which is called the USIN number, and every time it does a change, it increments that number. So the number only gets incremented and never goes back. And like with most clocks, you cannot turn back the time. You can only move forward. Now, this was true for physical servers, but with the virtual machines that we have now, there are a couple of ways that you can actually go back into time. So one way, of course, is to do a backup and then to restore. But the other way is, for example, to make a snapshot, run, and then at one point you will revert to the old snapshot. Now, turning back the time is not necessarily problematic as long as you tell Active Directory that you've turned back the time and that you are in fact recovering, and that it should actually sync all the changes that have occurred since that latest time, in that moment in time. So to do that, you really have to tell Active Directory that you are going to make a backup, you want to make everything consistent, and most of all, when you want to do the restore, you really want to tell Active Directory that you are doing a restore and that you are turning back the clock. So the first part, how do you make everything consistent? Well, Microsoft has in Windows a framework called VSS, and VSS is really an easy to integrate framework for a backup vendor. Because VSS is a framework, applications can plug into it, and backup vendors can plug into it as well. So applications can say, okay, I'm creating a writer, and then when the backup vendor requester is asking for a backup, that writer, that plugin for VSS will make sure that everything is consistent for that specific application. Now, of course, Microsoft has made writers for all of their applications. And for Active Directory, you can actually see two writers. So I can just go to a virtual machine maybe, and then it will become more clear. So let's take a virtual machine here. And let's, for example, open up a prompt. And let's run VSS admin list writers. And so when you run that, you will see that there are a couple of writers, a couple of applications. So first of all, when we call VSS, the registry will be made consistent, but also you can see the NTDS writer. This is the database writer, let's say. And you can also see that there is a DFSR writer to make the DFSR, the share consistent. So what we do is we call VSS, it calls the writers, and so our backup is consistent because we properly integrate with VSS. Now that's one part, and for most application, that's it. For Active Directory, we do more than that. So when we run application-aware image processing, what we do is we push a runtime component, we talk to VSS, but we also prepare the Active Directory server for recovery. So to make a proper backup, what you need to do is you go to your job settings, you go to guest processing, you enable application-aware image processing, which you can see here. You can give credentials, you can even test if your credentials are valid. And then what we will do is test if we can push a runtime component that can talk with VSS. So we'll test that now. If everything is fine, we can just run the job, and then everything will be made consistent. Now, something what I've told you before, when you run this, when you run the job, we'll also prepare Active Directory to make sure it is consistent. You can see the first job, they're consistent, it works. So let's just stop testing. So I want to show you something else. So when you make an application-aware image processing job, we do something special as well. So as you can see now, I'm querying the services every 500 milliseconds, so you can see a sleep. And I'm looking for a service that is called Veeam. As you can see, there is no service, so it's just putting dots while there are no Veeam service detected. Now, when I start the job, what Veeam actually does is it pushes the runtime component, and a new service will be injected inside the virtual machine. Now, that service will be kept there until we are ready to stop the backup. So we stop the backup, and then we remove it. But what is the most important thing is that service is injected in the backup as well. So when we restore Active Directory, what we actually do is we restore the complete VM. We restore it in DSRM mode, so Active Directory is aware that it is being restored from backup and it will sync correctly. And then this service will automatically reboot the VM back in normal operational mode or in non-authoritative mode, and it will successfully sync back with the other active domain controls. So it will literally say to the other domain controllers, hey, I got restored back from backup because I just rebooted from DSRM mode. I got restored from backup. Please sync with me the latest changes and know that I am not the guy that I used to be or that I need to have the latest updates. So we see the job is starting up, and we see that Active Directory is running here. So we're running now the pre-freeze script, so we're integrating with VSS. And you see we push that Veeam VSS support that is injected in the backup. And so during restore, that service is really responsible to do a successful restore. So that's very important because a lot of people have told us or have asked us in the past, okay, Veeam is a VM-based backup solution. Do you really make a good backup? Is it more snapshot-like, or is it a good backup? I can assure you it's a good backup. We really prepare the guests for doing the backup.
So Timothy,
okay.
we have a first question.
So the question is, what if we don't enable the guest processing checkbox on DC? That's a very good question. I will show you later what will happen. First of all, I do not recommend to do this because you will get a crash consistent backup. And when you do the restore, then you actually don't see, well, it's not aware that it's being restored. So bad stuff can happen because actually it's turning back the clock. And maybe it has objects that have already been deleted, and it wants to try to sync it back to the existing domain controller. So really not enabling application-aware image processing is the worst. So that's why there is actually a double safety. So there is a double safety in Active Directory. If you're running vSphere 5.0, update 2 or higher, or you're running Hyper-V 2.0, so the Windows 2012, and in combination with Active Directory 2012 or higher, there is a double safety, an anti-nuke my Active Directory sort of feature that Microsoft has built in. And what is this VM generation ID? Well, what you should know is that this device is basically just a device, and you can just read it, and it gives you some kind of integer, some kind of value. Now, every time there is a major change, the hypervisor will actually change the number that this device outputs. So the first time it will output, let's say 5. And when you revert, for example, to a snapshot, the hypervisor will change the generation counter. And then the next time the software reads out this number, it becomes 8, for example. And so Active Directory knows that the clock has been turned back and will also act like it was or it was restored from backup. So I can actually show you this. So first of all, I do recommend to use the application-aware image processing because it also makes sure that everything is restored perfectly. But what if you don't do it? That's a very good question. You have the generation ID. So you can see here, I made a very small program which is called the generation ID. And that generation ID, what it does is it outputs the current generation ID into the time and the current time. So if I run it again, so we have now 5 entries of this same generation ID. If I run it again, basically you will see that another line is added and the same generation ID is added again. So actually between the previous run and this run, nothing changed. So in the last 6 hours, nothing changed. But you do see that at lunch, actually, I was playing around. I created a snapshot on this VM. So I shut down the machine, created a snapshot, reverted the snapshot and powered on. And so the hypervisor actually changed the number that this device outputs. So it changed it to this, from this number to this number. Now this is my own tool, so I'm just detecting it myself, but actually it was to see if Active Directory would also detect it, but actually Active Directory did the same remark. So if I filtered out a couple of events, so just coming from the directory service log, and there I filtered out this 2170, 1109, 2008. Now if I click this one, you'll see that actually Active Directory said, okay, so you basically turned back the clock because I can see that the generation ID has changed. That's not good. You probably imported the virtual machine or you reverted to a snapshot. That's not good. I'm going to recover the domain controller. I'm going to give it a new invocation ID so that the other domain controllers know that it's another, well, I have another database and I need to update to the latest changes. It does give you this very friendly reminder, please do not use snapshots to restore. So it's a fail-safe, but clearly Microsoft themselves, they are saying, please use a good backup tool like Veeam with application-aware image processing. So you see it changed the invocation ID for the database, and it also said to the DFSR, well, we are going to do a non-authoritative restore because I'm not sure what the data is on DFSR. Let's resync it so that we are sure that we have valid data. So for the question asking, okay, what about if I don't use application-aware image processing? Well, I surely recommend to enable it. Even if you have some VSS issues, please try to work them out, because that's the way you get a proper backup that's ready for restore. But there is a failsafe in there if that's required. I already saw somebody asking another question, which is actually already in my slide deck as well. So what about the scripts you are using? Well, they are online. So I put them online on my GitHub. I'll show you quickly how you can get there. So the link is in the slide deck, but if you just go to GitHub / and then the T from Tango, the Win, that's my last name. You go there, and then you have repositories, Veeam PowerShell here, okay, and then you have AD Webinar, and all the scripts that I am showing or using are here. So you can actually download them later if you want. Okay, so do we have more questions in the meanwhile?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So the first question, and I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of them like the one before throughout the slides, but the one that I do have is that the stuff that you're showing, and the question is this for a full AD restore?
Yeah, so we're going to cover that one. So if you need to restore the whole whole VM or the whole Active Directory domain, we're going to cover that. So I'm going to show you where you can find all the necessary info to make the correct steps. So yeah, that for sure we're going to cover that, of course. Does the Hyper-V... Wait, I get a very interesting question here, sorry. Does Hyper-V Gen ID apply to VMware? So I see, that's a very good question, but you can actually see that I'm running on VMware. So yes, it does apply to VMware. You need 5.0 update 2, but the generation ID is fully supported by VMware in combination with Hyper-V. Okay, tell me, Sander, what else do we got?
Yeah, so there's one more question that I don't feel is getting enough attention in the slides yet. It's not bad, but does Veeam install any agent on guest VMs?
So that's a very good question. So that depends on your definition of an agent. So what we do is, you saw it actually, you saw me doing it. So what we do is we use the network, or we use the APIs from the hypervisor. So for VMware, we can use the VMware Tools APIs, and for Hyper-V, or for VMware, for Microsoft Hyper-V, we can actually nowadays use PowerShell Direct. But we do push a runtime component. So we do push something to the VM that integrates with VSS. So we talk directly inside the VM. What is important is, as I try to show you here as well, is that that service is added, but it's also automatically removed. So first of all, you don't get the burden of deploying it, because we do it for you. You don't have to install anything yourself. And second of all, it's automatically removed. So every time you update, you just update the backup server, and it will, the next time, it will just use the latest version. So is it an agent? I let it, well, you define what is an agent for you or not. We call it a runtime component. If you mean by an agent that we push some software into the VM, then it's an agent. If you mean that it's a hell to manage, then of course it's not an agent, because we do everything ourselves. And for updating, just have to update the backup server. So I think that quite covers the question.
Absolutely.
So do we have any other relevant roles? The FSMA roles. I see the question about the FSMA roles. So that's a very good one, because that's just basically the next slide. So I'm going to show you this. So yeah, there are some things. So first of all, Active Directory is multi-master. So it means that it's a kind of a cluster. Maybe it's not a cluster, maybe you don't like that term, but it is kind of a cluster. So you have multiple nodes that have the knowledge of the database, share a common database, and they can each do their own operations independently of each other, and then sync back to each other the changes. However, there are some stuff that cannot be done individually by each and every domain controller. And the easiest example for me is the read master to explain. So whenever you create a new object, you need to have a unique ID. And it has to be unique in the whole domain, because otherwise, if one domain controller uses the same unique ID as another domain controller, you get conflicting when you try to synchronize. So the way Active Directory does that is by supplying pools of unique IDs. So imagine you are Active Directory controller 1 and you want to create a new object. You see if you still have some free IDs in your pool. You have not. In this case, you contact the RIT master and you say, okay, give me some unique IDs. The RIT master creates a pool, let's say 2000 unique IDs, give it to the Active Directory server in a response, and then the Active Directory can create 2000 objects without ever having to contact back the RIT master. But it is the RIT master his responsibility to make sure that when it's giving out pools, that it's giving unique pools to everybody. So you cannot have two domain controllers being the RIT master because they might supply similar pools to other domain controllers. So it's a single master role or a single master operation role, hence the name FISMO. Now, it's a very good question. Do we need to back out? Do we need to know? Yes. This, I would recommend that you record somehow which Active Directories are holding the FISMO roles, because during restore, it's going to be the most easy restore if you restore those guys that are holding the most FISMO roles. Because, for example, if you restore a VM, if you restore Active Directory and the RIT master does not come online, that's not a problem at first because maybe they all have a pool, but after a while they cannot create more objects because they are running out of IDs. So the best thing is to redeploy, or when you have to restore your complete domain, is to restore the one that have the most roles and make sure that you restore all the Active Directory servers that have FISMO roles so that they get back. If you cannot do that because one is corrupted or is, I don't know, you don't have a good backup, you can seize the role on another Active Directory server, but then that original domain controller should never get back because it would still think that it's holding the role, and that could lead into problems. So let's see, how can we actually record who is holding the FISMO roles? And so to do that, let's go to one server here. Okay, and what we will do now is the old-fashioned way. So, and I have to be correct here. So you have the netdom query FISMO. So that's just going to tell you who is who. So who's the schema master, who's the RIT master, and so on. What you can also do is, if you want to be more PowerShell minded, you can also get this information with PowerShell. And there are actually two ways or two commands that are really helpful. So the first one is AD domain. If you get the AD domain, you can actually figure out which Active Directory servers are holding the domain level operation roles. So, for example, you have the PDC emulator here. So let's just do a little PowerShell. So let's say PDC emulator, or let's put this in the ED. Okay, AD PDC emulator. It's telling me, okay, AD team 1. The infrastructure role is there, infrastructure master as well. And you also have the RIT master. For forest level FISMO roles, because there are some roles that are forest level, so you have some that are unique for the domain, but you also have some that are forest level. So for example, the schema has to be the same over your complete forest, and that's because there is AD forest, a role at the forest level. So let's take forest, and here you can see schema master, and you can also see the domain naming master. Now, how do you record this? Well, you could make a script and then you can just run it once in a while and then record it like this. But of course, they are flexible roles, and anybody could just say, okay, I want to move a FISMO role. And how do you do that? You could say, actually, and I have to cheat and quickly look at my notes because it's a long command, Active Directory operation master role. So there is a command to do that. So let's say, okay, the RIT master role, I want to move that in that case, I'm just saying identity. So now it's AD team 2. Let's move it to AD team 1. And what role do we want to move? Read master. Okay. So I'm moving it now. And then if I now get the ID domain and I get the read master, you will see that this flexible role has actually moved to ADT. So you might occasionally run a script to record that, but I actually found an easier way to do that, and that's actually by running a pre-script on your virtual machine. So what you can do, and I'll just show you the pre-script, you go to your backup server, and you have this small script called adconfig. It's also on the GitHub. And basically, it uses the same commands as we did before, but it outputs it to in the directory adconfig in the text file fsmo.txt. Then you go to your job, and notice I'm doing this all on the backup server. You go to guest processing, applications. You take the Active Directory server that you want. You go to scripts. And there you can run a pre-script. So you can run the script here, select it on the backup server itself. So notice that I'm selected it on the backup server. And what happens is when Veeam Backup and Replication runs, it takes the script, it will send it off to the virtual machine and run the script inside the virtual machine. So in my case, I have it on the backup and replication server, but I ran multiple Active Directory servers or configured them to run the script, and Veeam will automatically push the script and will automatically run it in there. So the result is that when the backup runs and you go to adconfig, you get a file, Fismo role, and so on. Now, of course, every time the backup runs, it will overwrite this file, so you only get the latest configuration, let's say. So what's interesting is that actually the data or this information who was holding the Fismo role is also in the backup. So what you can do is just say, okay, I want to start a guest file recovery, select your restore point, and then you can just say, okay, open the file level recovery, go to adconfig, select the Fismo role, open it, and you can see that the state of the Fismo roles is included this way into your backup. So if I change the role, I back up again, the new state will actually be included in the backup. So I can just open it and see, okay, for this backup moment, this was the configuration. If I would run the script again, you would see that the read master would actually be moved. So I think it's a neat trick to have to know where your Fismo roles are. I think that's quite important, that before you actually start restoring your domain is to take a look at that file and then to validate, okay, which one is holding the PDC emulator, for example, which one is holding the domain name and so on there, so that you make sure that you redeploy all the Fismo holders, let's say, and if you don't deploy them, that you cease a couple of those roles. So Sander, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we do. And just to clarify a bit about those Fismo roles, because you can seize every one of them. It's not a problem if you want to get to a consistent state from an inconsistent state, but it would be a shame if you're running out of relative identifiers, running out of RIDs, and you don't restore the RID master first, and you lose another 500 RIDs by default. So that's the kind of stuff that we're thinking about. We got a lot of questions about the AD recycle bin, of course, but we'll get to that. No worries. We've got a question, which is a real Veeam question. And the question is, when I added the Veeam backup job for a vSphere host, and I checkmark Enable Application Web Processing, and then click on Applications button, should I see an Active Directory tab? All I see is General, SQL, Oracle, and Scripts tab.
No, that's exactly correctly. So I like to call it the green magic. So you don't have to configure anything. So by default, it's all good for Active. So the only thing you need to do is go to guest processing, and then for Active Directory, everything is good by default. So we do talk to VSS, actually we talk to VSS and we make everything consistent that has VSS. So every application that has VSS will make consistent. So there is no special notice because there is no special configuration that you need to do. So what you saw me do earlier, the AD config, is really a script that I wrote myself, and that you can use it if you want, but and this way it will self-record basically which VM is holding the FSMO role. Okay?
Correct. Yes.
So that makes sense.
So it just works.
Yeah, it just works.
Well, there's the Veeam slogan again. All right. Then, of course, we get a question about the FSMO roles and losing them and getting them back. But we showed that. So we got a demo on demand for some people here. And another question is, what scripting languages can you create the prescripts in?
That's a very good question. Actually, you can look at the extension. I know that you can use bat scripts. So basically, even if you cannot do the ones you want, you can still embed them in a bat script or something. But you can see here, actually, it can be an exe, which is not a script, but it's a bat file. And then you can see actually the Windows scripting hosts ones like VBS. God knows who still does that, but I mean, there are probably some people that like the VBS part, and then the PowerShell script. So I think nowadays more and more people are looking into PowerShell. I think really if you are looking at the perfect scripting language for Microsoft, I think that is PowerShell is the way to go. And that's why I also try to focus a bit on this in the webinar. So Sander, what's your favorite scripting language nowadays?
It's PowerShell. It's PowerShell all the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, since Microsoft ended the support for Windows Server 2003, I feel we can go PowerShell all the way. Absolutely.
Yep. So that's that. Okay, let's continue. So we do get a couple of questions about the recycle bin. Well, we actually don't use the recycle bin because we have our own tool to do the recovery, but you can, of course, enable the Active Directory recycle bin and then use that feature inside Microsoft, but we have our own tool. So I'm going to talk about item level recovery. And what's important before we talk about item level recovery is tombstone. So what happens when you delete an object? Well, that object is not really deleted, because if you would delete it, Active Directory would not have an object to say to the other guys, hey, this object has been deleted because it's already gone. So that's a bit of a paradox. You can never notify the other guy that an object is deleted because it's gone. So Active Directory has a good way to resolve that. And what they do is they take the object and they bring it to the graveyard and strip it to the bone. That's what they literally do. They take the object, they remove a lot of extra attributes. They keep some of the key attributes like the unique ID, but then they store it in another, let's say, container inside Active Directory that's a bit hidden, which is called deleted objects. And there it remains, these, let's say, skeletons. They remain there for 180 days. So what does this allow? Well, all the other Active Directory servers are getting up to date and they know, okay, this object is being deleted. I also have to put it there. And then after 180 days, the graveyard might become a bit full. So after 180 days, all the Active Directory servers know, okay, that period has passed. Now it's safe to just remove it because all the other Active Directories are aware that it should be deleted one of these any moment now, let's say. So when you restore and the item is still in Tombstone, then the best thing what you can do is actually revive that skeleton. So you take the skeleton, you give it back its attribute, and you move it back. And that's exactly what we do with the Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Active Directory. So I'm going to show you that. And what is it? It's the item level recovery tool. So it's really easy to use. So the first thing what we are going to do is we are going to go to an Active Directory domain. And let's find Cherry. So Sherry is a very good employee. She works in the OU Amsterdam. You can see she's there in the OU Amsterdam. She's very much alive. So let's go into Active Directory, find her. Okay, she's here. Okay, let's delete Sherry. Okay, so there she goes. She's gone. But actually, like I said, she's not really gone. She's just on the graveyard in the deleted object. And when we run the script again and we try to find her, we can actually find her again, and she's actually located in a container called the deleted objects. Now you cannot see it from this script run, but actually a lot of attributes have been stripped, and she has been renamed, but she did keep her original object ID. And the funny thing is, you can see the USN created time. So when the object was created is the same. So when she was born, that never changes. But when she was changed, you can see that the USN number has changed. So the clock has changed in Active Directory, and we modified Cherry to say, okay, she's stripped, she's deleted. And so her USN change number is restored. So now the challenge will be to revive Cherry back from this dark graveyard, which is called deleted object, bring her back to Amsterdam, if possible. So let's open up the backup. And so here is another reason why you should enable application-aware image processing. So when you go to the menu, you see here restore application items. I can just click Microsoft Active Directory objects. If it would be an Exchange server and you used application-aware image processing, this one would not be here, because during the backup we discovered that this is an Active Directory server and you can only do item level recovery. Well, there is a trick around actually. What you can do is actually emulate what the Explorer is doing automatically here. So first of all, you can start to open a file level recovery session, and what will happen is Veeam mounts the disk under Veeam EVLR. So you can actually see that happening here. So Veeam EVLR, the name of the VM, and then some randomness to make sure that you don't get any problems if you have multiple users opening EVLRs. Name of the volume, and then under Windows, it knows that because we used application-aware image processing, that in the NTS did file, the database is there, and actually then it adds the database and just refers to that. So if you didn't use application-aware image processing, or you have a database from another backup, you can actually still open it with Active Directory Explorer. So you start the file level recovery so that you can see that database file. You go to Veeam, and then you can start this Explorer for Active Directory, the same you see now. You push add database, and then you can go to that location and add the database. So that would be in case that you didn't enable application-aware image processing. When you do enable application-aware process, the process is completely automated. You just open the wizard and it automatically opens the database. So let's find Cherry in the backup, see if she's there. So fair enough, is she there? Yeah, she's there. If you cannot see her here instantly because it's a big less, there's also another cool trick you can do. You can click your container and say compare all objects. And then it will actually compare the backup against the original state, or the state that it's in now. And you can see that it actually says, oh, okay, Cherry, she's tombstone. So the Veeam Explorer successfully detected that Cherry got tombstoned. And also interesting to see is that it says that Amsterdam minions has changed. Why is that? Well, let's compare. Okay, the member attribute has changed, and we can see that Cherry was removed from that group. So you can see how it all ties together in Active Directory. Cherry is really removed from the backup, or from the production, from that group. So let's restore Cherry now, and I'm gonna restore to the wizard. Go to that domain. I'm not in the domain, or my backup is not in the domain, so I need to give it some credentials. Restoring to the original container, so you can also do out of place restore. You can even restore the password. So even if you did something less fun, like deleting a complete OU, you could actually restore the whole OU and say, okay, restore password, and then just blame the network guy saying there was something strange with the network, but now it's all good. It wasn't Active Directory, it's full. So let's restore the account. Next, okay, what should we do if it's still there, or what if values are conflicting? Restore, and then we get her back. So now you can see that it automatically updates. There are no changes anymore. if I now go to Active Directory and I run the same find objects, it's telling me that Cherry got back to Amsterdam. So let's refresh here. And I always have to find the refresh button. There we go. Cherry is back. And let's compare a bit. The object ID has not changed. So even she went to the graveyard and she came back, her object ID was the same. The USN created is the same, but you can see the USN change again has been updated because we brought her back and we actually added attributes to her. Okay, Sander, did we get more questions in the meanwhile?
Yes, we did, because someone is really desperately looking for an answer if the full AD restore works with the Windows Server 2008 R2, domain function level, and forest function level.
Yes, it should work because, well, if you use then you don't get the security of the VM generation ID, of course. So there, it's extremely crucial that you use the application-aware image processing to have that safeguard. You don't have that safeguard if you're running 2008 because VM generation ID is something new in the Windows 2012, actually. So if you are running that, that's fine, but make sure, absolutely make sure that you are running application-aware image processing, and then it's going to be all fine. But without it, you don't have that double safeguard, and you might too, if you do a crash consistent restore, you might restore the Active Directory server, and it will not be aware that it was being restored, so it might not recover successfully, or worse, it might recover and think that it did not get restored, it just powered on or something, and it might sing back stuff that's already been deleted for a long time, or you get lingering objects, or you get
Use and rollbacks, stuff like that.
Stuff like that, very dirty stuff. So yes, it is supported, but make sure that you use application-aware image processing. So to repeat again, application-aware image processing and generation IDs, there are two separate things, and the first defense should be this application-aware image processing. The generation ID is there just as an extra backup, as an extra safety switch. So you don't necessarily need it, but it's good that it's there starting from 2012. Okay?
Yes.
All right. So let's continue with this wizard because we saw here, and by the way, you can also change small attributes. So if you want, let's change, for example, Cherry. Let's change her to Chero, Chera. She's not going to like that too much, right? So if we go back to the user or the wizard and we do compare, you will actually see that she's changed. And there you can say, okay, compare, okay, her name has changed. And in this case, you can choose not to restore the whole object, but for example, only this individual item. And then it's also restored. So it's very granular. You can also restore an OU. In this case, it will just restore the OU and all the users underneath it. So it can go pretty far. But another cool feature is what we added, and that's new since our last webinar, is that we also support group policies. Now, to watch group policies, I'm first going to go into Active Directory and show you what a group policy is actually made of. So you can see here, I have a couple of group policies, GPO sub Brussels. And it looks like it's a single object in Active Directory. Well, that's not really the case. So let's go a bit forensic and let's use the LDP command. It's the really low-level native tool for Microsoft to query LDP, so it's really low level. And the first thing I do want to tell you, I'm not going to show it too much, but if you want to look at deleted objects, you can enable that object here. So you have to load that control. Connect, I'm just connecting to Active Directory here, binding here, and then I'll just take a look at this, the main partition, so not the configuration partition or the DNS or whatever, but I'm just going to look at the main partition, and you'll see that you get plus minus the same as the users and directory. Now, group policies are not there in the native wizard. So if you look here, there is no container that has the policies. You also don't see the deleted objects, but with LDP you can actually see, take a look at the deleted objects. What you can also do is look up the policies. So policies are a bit hidden, and I always have to think system, I believe it is, and then policies. And here you can actually see the policy. So let's click on policy. What we can see is that the policy is just another object in Active Directory. It has some ID, special ID, and in this case we are looking at the GPO sub Brussels. It's easy to remember because it has BE Belgium Brussels, so 1 BE GPO sub Brussels. But what you can see here is that it's made of some attribute, and you can also see that the policy itself, it's stored on the sysvol volume. So let's go and take a look at the sysvol volume. And you can actually see the structure of a group policy here. Yeah, there's not a lot in there, so because it's just an empty one because it's pre-generated. But you can see a group policy is basically a couple of files on the sys volume and a couple of attributes or an object with attributes in Active Directory. So when we delete it, both should of course disappear. So let's delete it, the GPO for Brussels. And then what we see is that for those that have a very fast connection, maybe you saw it, but 1BE was removed. So the directory was removed. If we look at the policy folder itself, we'll also see that the object representing the GPO for Brussels is also removed. So let's restore it with the Veeam Explorer for Active Directory. Now, let's first of all compare it, and then Veeam will actually notice that it has been deleted. And let's restore it now to the original location. So let's restore. And I do want to do something so that it's apparent that we also restore the directories. So you see 12 items restored. Okay, let's restore the group policy now. And I get a failure. That's not really good. So what happened here? I don't know. Let's see. I was playing around earlier before the demo, so I have no idea why. Okay, have to look in the logs, but I have a pretty good idea why it's doing that. So let me just quickly delete another one. Let's take N1FFF, because I have been playing with that. So let's take this one, and that's of course the Helsinki one, 1FFF. Okay, let's compare. And then we have the Helsinki one. Let's restore it back. And maybe I didn't use the correct credentials. That could be the case as well. Let's restore. So it got restored. So you see now it's gone. And if we go back to the Helsinki one, we'll actually see that it successfully got restored back to the original location. So you see Helsinki is back here. And if we do the policy update, we can also see that Helsinki is, what is the path here that it got back. So that's something I know why it actually happened, the demo. So I'm not in the real Active Directory domain, so I have to make sure that the credentials are correct. And this is actually a new best practice we see. Well, a lot of customers are doing that nowadays. They don't include the backup server itself in the Active Directory domain. And the reason is simple. If you get a CryptoLocker virus or something like that, then that CryptoLocker could also potentially impact your backup server and encrypt your backup. So I'm sorry for the hiccup in the restore, but you saw that it worked. Okay, do we got more questions?
Yeah, because it's funny, because we actually got a question on that particular subject. So one of the questions that was asked is, if my Veeam backup server is added to the domain and all the backups run under the domain admin account, and then all the 80 domain controllers are gone, then can I switch to a sort of local mode on the Veeam servers and start restoring in local admin mode the AD servers?
Well, first of all, yeah, if you would have deployed it like me, then yeah, you can clearly see that you can even restore even if you are not in the domain. So that's perfectly fine. If you can log in, that will work as well. Maybe the only thing that might needs to be updated on your server is that when you log in with the local credentials of the backup server or something, it might be so that the way the backup server, the service itself, talks to the SQL service is also being done with Active Directory. And in that case, you can ask support to assist you in that. You need to update the registry so that it uses other credentials to talk to the SQL server. If you lost everything,
then of course, yes, and then of course there's IPv servers that could be domain joined, and then of course there's the storage that you could use some sort of authentication on. That might also be domain credentials, or you might have a firewall in between that you need to change to allow traffic. That is also relying on Active Directory for authentication. So there's all kinds of stuff where that could go wrong.
Yeah, of course, and
good fun, yeah.
I think that's why at one point Microsoft was still recommending people to say, okay, use physical server instead of a virtual one. However, nowadays they are also recommending to make everything virtual, right? So yeah, there could be a number of solutions, but that's surely a good question. Should we run the Veeam server in the domain or not? I think most solution architects would now recommend it not to run it in the domain because you don't get that chicken egg situation from our side. But anyway, if you did and you are not able to log in, what you can also do is just make a clean install, and you can always import the backup. So if they are stored somewhere on a SIF share or they're stored on a Windows server, you can still access them, but you cannot boot a backup server, you can still import them. So that's really good. So there's always a way. Is Veeam Explorer for Active Directory only available to enterprise licenses? And that's a very good question. I wasn't planning on covering it today, but actually it is available in every version. But if you want to restore back to the original location, and that's what you want to do, then you do need the Enterprise Edition. If you have the Standard Edition, what you can do is you can take the user, for example, and let's take a user object here, and you can actually say export to the desktop, for example. Okay, let me show you what happens then. So you cannot restore to the original location, but you can export. Now I have to find, and you see Alexander here. And it's falsely saying that it's a database file because it's actually not. It's an LDIF file. So let's open it with, for example, Notepad, and then you will see it. So what it does is it exports it with LDIF. And what you can do is you can import it. But in this case, you are not really restoring from. You're not really restoring a user from the tombstone, from the graveyard. You basically are creating a new user. Another issue I found is that the default domain policy does not allow you to restore a user without any password. And as you can see, there is no password for this guy in this export file. So it's going to complain about that as well. So you might need to update the policy. So long story short, if you want to have easy restores, then the Explorer for Active Directory and the Enterprise license would be really recommended. By the way, some people have already said, okay, I'm leaving because the time is getting short. What is important is this is being recorded, so we will get a recording, a link to the webinar later on. So don't worry about that one. So you can rewatch it later, even if you have to leave early, because like Sander said, or already promised, is we're gonna run in overtime here. So I talked about the group policy, or I showed it, where it was and so on. Let's talk about full VM restore. So full VM restore, when we did the previous webinar, I had a lot of discussions with a lot of people, and there are a couple of discussions. Some people like one way, some people like the other way. But what is good is that our support team has actually written a KB article how you should restore in a couple of scenarios. Now, the first and most important is 90% of the time, just restoring will just working, because 90% of the time you still have surviving nodes, right? So you still have those nodes. So you can just restore. And what we do is when we do the restore, when you enable application-aware image processing, we tell the VM that is being restored, and it will just start up and will first boot in DSRM mode, reboot automatically, and then it will be in non-authoritative mode for both the database and the sysvol. So it will just say to peers, okay, I got restored, sync me back the changes, and after a while, everything will be running smooth again. So 90% of the time, that's fine. Also, if you have only one host, in the previous webinar, we had a guide that only had one Active Directory host. Well, in that case, you can just say, okay, restore, because there are no other nodes and it will be all fine. If there are no surviving nodes, you can just restore 2 controllers and try to take the ones with the most FSMA roles, or all of them with the FSMA roles, so that you get those roles back, like we explained earlier. Force one to be DFSR authoritative, so that will work. The replication will start working, and you can disable the initial replication on the first one, so it doesn't look for, let's say, peers. Now, this is all explained how you should do it, because what you need to do is reboot the machine and then put some extra stuff, keys, in the registry. Now, I'm not going to show you how to manually do that, because I'm going to show you how it's being done by SureBackup. So SureBackup has an option, or SureBackup is our tool to automatically validate your backups, and that's really nice. But it also will do this when you select the authoritative role. So here's an article that explains how you can do it in detail. So if you lose all your domain controllers, restore a couple of them and make sure you get the FSMA roles, and it gives you all the details, right? And then finally, it has one more thing, and I also have it in the slide, but what happens when you have corruption? Well, in that case, you have to rely on the Active Directory stuff. What you could do is just delete the complete domain. That could be an option. What you can also do is just take one domain controller, boot it again in DSRM mode, like it's explained here, and then you can do an authoritative restore of the DC with NTDS util. So NTDS util is really core. You can use it to seize and transfer roles as well. You can also use NTDS util, for example. I can actually show it to you. So it's pretty cool. NTDS util is so versatile, but you can actually use NTDS util for a lot of stuff. So first of all, you can do authoritative restores with it, like explained in the KB article. But what you can also do is just say, okay, roles, and transfer and seize roles, like I showed you earlier in PowerShell. What you can also do with it is metadata cleanups, and that can be a final scenario which is not explained in my slide deck nor in the KB article. If, for example, you have a VM and it was, for example, the read master before, you backed it up, and now it didn't get back, you didn't get it to work, and you seized the role of the read master to another Active Directory server. That server might still be there in your Active Directory sitting somewhere. So what you need to do is you need to remove the server from the domain, but that's kind of hard to do, because whenever you try to do it, it's going to say, yeah, that server is not available. Well, in that case, you can use NTDS util, and you can do a metadata cleanup. So there are a couple of restore scenarios here, but that's one of them. If, for example, an Active Directory is completely lost and you think, okay, even the backup will be full bar, as they say it, F up beyond all repair, you can just say, okay, let's do a metadata cleanup. Let's just remove it completely. And then what I will do is just create a new Active Directory controller and then just add it to the domain and let it sync. So that could be another alternative method for restoring. So, but what we will show you today is actually not the first scenario, because that's quite easy. So if you have surviving nodes or you are a standalone domain, just restore it. If you had application-aware image processing, of course. And then, but what we will show you with the SureBackup is the no surviving nodes. So let me go to SureBackup, and I'm just gonna power it on, because in the previous run, it took some time to run the demo. So I'm just first gonna lock a bit the session. let's take the log shell. So log shell, it's a small thing I made. It's quite interesting. What you can do is just, you can find it on the GitHub as well, but what it just does is it looks for logs that are sure backup logs. So in my case, it's just saying, okay, we have a couple of logs here because I have 3 jobs. Which one do you want to look at? I'm just going to tail log number 2 here because that's the one we're going to use, the team log. And I put some, or I matched some content and put another color to highlight that during the demo itself. So now I'm going to start up the Sure Backup job already, the team one, and it's going to start running, and hopefully I can show you some stuff in the meanwhile. So let's go to verification. So verification, so as I said or showed you already, Sure Backup, what is it? It's a tool to automatically verify if your backups are okay. And we actually have already integration with Active Directory. So there are some rules there that will check for Active Directory. Now, Sure Backup itself, it's made up of a couple of components, the virtual lab, and basically that's a Linux router that will start up and that will actually masquerade the Sure Backup or the isolated environment, and we'll make sure that the VMs that we power on in that lab can keep their IP address, so it don't have to change, but they cannot talk to the production environment. However, you from the backup server can talk to them to make sure that everything works. Then you have an application group. What is an application group? It's a list of VMs that you need to test other VMs. So you can imagine that Active Directory is quite crucial there, because to test, for example, the SQL Server, as we have already discussed earlier, Alexander already mentioned, if you want to start up the SQL Server, probably you need Active Directory, right? So what you put in the application group is really the servers that you need to test other servers. And Active Directory, in 99% of the cases, should be there. And then you tie that all together, the virtual lab, the application group, and you can link jobs to it. And what it will do is it will start up all the VMs in the application group, and then keep those VMs in the application group running, and then test all the VMs in the linked jobs one by one, or actually 3 by 3 by default. They will power them on, test them, power them off, and test the next 3 ones. But the ones in application group are running the whole time. There are some predefined roles here. So you have the Active Directory tests, and there are some tests for the DNS server, the domain controller, and the global catalog. What you can see is they are basically port scans. So they basically are going to test if we can make a TCP/IP connection, and then if we can, we're just going to say, okay, the service is answering on that port. That must mean that the service is running because something is running on that port. We do have 2 roles, and we have the domain controller role out and non-out. And why is that? Because actually, when you select authoritative restore, we'll actually edit the VM before we power it on, and we'll actually apply those registry settings we saw earlier in the KB article to make sure that the first one is actually restored authoritative. So it will force a DFSR in authoritative mode and will actually disable initial replication. And then the second node we can just put in non-authoritative, and then it will actually find the first one and sync with it and do a successful restore. So basically, the Sure Backup is showing you what it would be like if you would follow the KB article. Would we be able to restore everything? So let me just go into the config, and you can see the job is already running. So first, we define the virtual lab. I'm not going to talk too much about the virtual lab, but I can show you basically what it does. It's this small Linux appliance that is being booted. And what we created is in the networking of the ESXi host, we created a virtual switch that is completely separated from the production environment because it does not have any uplink adapters. And the lab router, it's going to act like the production default gateway. So if, for example, AD team and AD team 2, which is going to power on later, are in a different network, they can still, well, they will send a package to the default gateway, which the lab router is mimicking, will forward the package between those virtual VLANs. And we can actually talk to the router because it is connected to the same network as our backup server. So it's really creating a completely separate environment from our production environment and powering on the VM here. So if we take a look at AD Team, we'll see that it has IP address 4.2, and the one in the lab actually gets the same IP address because it's not being changed, but it's being isolated by that lab router. And then we define an application group. Again, those are the VMs that you need to test other VMs. So in this case, well, that's the Active Directory server. So if I go into Team, I added 2 virtual machines, the Active Directory server. If we take a look at the first one, you'll see that I chose Authoritative Restore for the first one. And for the second one, I chose the main controller non-authoritative restore. So the second one is going to boot later, and it's not going to be restored authoritatively. For the second one, I did something extra. I created my own script, which is test user count. And that goes a bit farther than a port count. So I can just show it to you here, and then we'll discuss the result later. But what you can see is basically I'm going to connect to that Active Directory server in that lab environment, get all the users in a certain OU or in a certain container, and I'm going to count them, see if there are more than the one that I defined. So in my script, I basically set more than 50 users or something in my configuration. So if I get more than 50 users, then it's okay, then the restore is successful. Now this script tells more than just a simple port scan, right? Because we were able, if this works, we are able to actually connect to Active Directory, we are able to do a query, and we are actually able to get a good result. So you can find that script online, but when you run this, it goes that extra mile, right? It really sees if Active Directory works. So let's look at the Sure Backup job now, because it's already booted, it's already doing stuff now, and it's already starting to test. So let's take a look. You can see that the first one is already started. So it's going through the process step by step. It already sees that the heartbeat is okay and the ping is okay. So surely it will start doing the application test after some time, because we give it some time to boot the application as well. You can see the Active Directory server here, like we showed earlier, and the other one will come soon as well. So let's take a look into the logs and show you some interesting stuff, right? So the first thing that I want to show you is when you go to the logs, you will actually see that we really do what is described in that KB article. So you can see here, and I made it yellow so it's very clear, you can see here that Sure Backup does something called a step called prepare DC. So you can look into the logs for that prepare DC. I'm sorry, just scroll back. You can see that it really does something. It copies actually the registry file out of the backup file, or let's say out of the virtual machine on the fly. So it does that by using the VMware APIs. It does some manipulations, so it puts the burr flags if you're still using the old way of doing file level replication. So if you're running 2008, you'll see that's gonna work fine. We still have support for that as well. However, if you're using 2012, you'll see that we disable the initial replication, and for the DFSR, we will put it in authoritative mode. So if you choose that authoritative role, it's really gonna execute what is described in that scenario. Okay, so it's running now, so I'm just gonna let it do, and I just want to show you this part as well. So this is called stable IP, and what does this algorithm do? It just to show you that the Active Directory will automatically reboot. So we are aware that it's going to happen. So what happens when you do a full VM restore? Like I said, it boots up first in the DSRM mode, so in restore mode. And you can see that it's the Sure Backup detected that the VM was up because it can see the IP. And actually it says, okay, let's see if the IP stays stable. And you see after a while, it doesn't, the IP is gone. Why is that? Because the service is there that we showed earlier by application-aware image processing. It rebooted the VM automatically, and so the IP is gone because the VM rebooted. So now we know, okay, the VM has rebooted. Let's wait again till we get a stable IP so that we know that it rebooted. And then if it rebooted, we'll check again that it stays stable. And after a while, if it's stable, then we know that it got rebooted and it actually booted up stably. And we can test the scripts. So that's what it's doing now. Probably by now, or let's hope, that Sure Backup was able to run, so it means our backup was okay. Well, you can see that it did test the VM, the script ran, so we were able to contact the DNS server, the global catalog, the domain controller, and now we are booting up the second one, and it's booting up. It's going through the same processing, starting in DSRM mode and then automatically rebooting. By the way, you can actually access the VM. So if you click it, we will start an RDP session to that VM in that remote lab. So if you want to go a bit farther and look into the VM, you can actually do that. So Sander, while we are waiting for the last one to boot and to run our custom script to check if Active Directory is really working, did we get some more questions?
We got lots of questions, and fortunately I was able to answer almost everyone, except for the last question that I didn't have time for, so let's do this one together. We got a question, or actually a remark, that a person doesn't see the authoritative or non-authoritative restore modes in Sure Backup. And the question is this added in a newer version?
Exactly. So this thing, what we did, the authoritative restore role, where you now have the option to choose the role, is something that we added in version 9.5. So if you don't see that role, you actually just need to upgrade to 9.5. Maybe unrelated to Active Directory, but know that 9.5, if you have a valid license contract or maintenance contract, you can just go to our website, download it, and upgrade. So newer versions are included in support. And if you were already running 9, you can just upgrade with the same license key. You don't need to request a new license key, but because the license key is 9.x, so it will work fine for 9.0 and 9.5. So exactly, if you don't see that role, you really need to upgrade to 9.5, and then you can actually select one of those roles.
All right, so that was the question that we got.
Okay, so, well, we're waiting here for the final one, the AD team to power on, and then we'll are quite done. Did we actually cover everything? Do you think we covered everything? And if not, if you still have questions, so we'll just let this run, and when it's run, we're gonna wrap it up. But in the meanwhile, if you still have questions, please do not hesitate. Well, if we are still waiting, and that's actually a good question. So the role that was being added, so you have the role for Active Directory, 2 roles now. So before it was 1 role. Something else I do want to share with it, and it's a bit unrelated with Active Directory, but if we're talking about the subject of Active Directory, or if we're talking about these Sure Backup roles, there's also a new role, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365. So for those who don't know, we actually made a new product which is called Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, which allows you to actually back up your emails that are stored in Office 365. So if you move to Office 365 with you don't have an on-premise Exchange server anymore, you can download, or you can find that product on our website. It is a separate license, so I'm just going to warn you in advance. And the cool thing is, what you can do is you can install that software into a VM, let it back up inside that VM, all your emails. And the way it integrates with backup and replication is that you just back up the VM where you installed Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365. So it can work standalone, but if you want to integrate it, install it in a VM, back it up with backup and replication. First thing, it will detect that it's a Veeam Backup for Office 365 because there is actually a VSS writer for our product. So it will detect that. It will allow you to do item level recovery for Exchange from the same menu, as I showed you earlier, how you can start the Veeam Explorer. So you can actually start the Explorer also from Veeam Backup and Replication. And you can also validate if the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 is doing a good job, if it's recoverable, because we just added a new role for Office 365. So probably if you don't see that one, those two, you will probably see, you won't see that Veeam Backup for Office 365 neither. And of course, when I open this, when I start talking about this one, we get a totally unrelated question about Active Directory as well. Is it there for OneDrive and SharePoint? No. So in the first stage, this product is only covering the mailbox items. But in a later stage, maybe we might consider OneDrive and SharePoint. I think there is a very good use case for it, because when we present it, most of the times customers are asking if we will do it for OneDrive and SharePoint as well. So I think our product management is really open for that as well. So maybe in the future, but for now it's only the emails. So let's see. I don't see any new questions. We can see that actually the Active Directory is booting. So let's go look in the logs again. So where are we at? So it did start, the ping test is working. So it's probably now just waiting for the application to power on. So we just give it a delay. And by the way, you can adjust those settings in the configuration as well, but it's just waiting now 150 seconds for the application to boot, and then it will run the default test, but also my own test, and it will actually download the users from that server in the domain, in that Sure Backup lab, and test if there are more than 50 users in that lab. And again, okay, so actually a very good question from Maria is actually, do we need to specify settings for the Sure Backup application startup group startup time? That's a very good question, because actually there is a known issue with the latest version. So it's a really funny issue. So I will explain. So when you actually change the roles to Active Directory, it will automatically change here the maximum allowed boot time and so on. Now, there is one issue they have with the latest version. So they built something into the framework saying if the VM gets unsuspended, so if you backed up a suspended VM, something like that, and you unsuspend it, what it will do is it will take that into account and know that it doesn't have to reboot. So when it sees a reboot, it gets all fluffy. Now, the timeout to define if a VM boots too fast, so that it must have been suspended, was 30 seconds. And before that didn't pose an issue because instant VM recovery was not fast enough to power on the Active Directory controller in 30 seconds. Now with 9.5, they actually improved instant VM recovery so much that now you get false errors, or Sure Backup is actually thinking that you restored from a suspended VM because it's booting too fast, so it's funny. So in that case, you might lower the maximum allowed boot time. If you're running in some issues with Active Directory where it says, okay, could not boot in time or something like this, or something with the timeouts, please open a support call. There are some registry settings they can change. I think it's even changed in update 1, but just I think it's a bit of a funny issue. I analyzed it myself with some colleagues. So we're booting up, or we're recovering the VMs via instant VM recovery too fast for the Sure Backup framework. But they must have changed it in update 1. But for sure, if you're running into some boot time issues with Active Directory, open a call with our support case, and they might. There are also some registry keys. Now, by default, normally you should not change those. Actually, when you select a role, it will automatically change it itself. But again, if you're running 9.5, not update 1, and you are running into some timeout issues, then talk to our support. So, okay, so Sure Backup team is running. So it's 99%, and the reason why is actually, I can just close it, I will show you why. Because actually in the Sure Backup job, in this Sure Backup job, I actually said keep the application group running. So if you want to do some testing or you want to do some exports that are not possible with the Veeam Explorer, you can just keep the application group running, and then it powers on the VMs, but doesn't automatically close the job. So you can actually see the VMs and play around. If you want to test, for example, an upgrade or something like that, you can just power it on as a lab environment and then connect to it, like I showed you earlier with RDP, and do your test. And then when you just disable the lab again, it's all cleaned up. And so let's look at the jobs or the tests we did. So it did test the DNS server, so that port was responding, the domain controller was responding, the global catalog, it's all fine. And by the way, my custom script where I tested the users, it worked as well. So it did give me a correct item, and I can actually see it in the logs as well. If I go in the logs, it should say something like, okay, custom script test here, got 60 users in that OU, so it must be all good. And you can actually see that it is running against another IP than the default here, and it is querying that. So it's all running fine. Now, if you don't believe me, okay, maybe some people will say, okay, it's a demo, so it must work. Well, I did spend some time this morning struggling with it because wrong parameters to the script and so on, and you can actually see that it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does fail. So it's a really more extensive test that is my gift for keeping you in this session. And with that, I think we're wrapping it up. If we still have some questions, so I see there's one more question here.
Well, there's actually two questions.
Okay.
So there's one question with someone asking that after the server is restored in DSRM, it then reboots again.
Yes.
And what might the cause be?
Well, that means that you're backing up correctly, because that's basically what the behavior that we want. That's basically a successful restore. So we boot it. When you do the backup, Veeam configures the machine to power on in DSRM mode, and the service will actually reboot it back to regular mode. But then the server knows that it was restored from backup. So basically, when that happens, that's a successful run. That's all according to plan to make a nice, neat restore. So as long as
but the question is, what if it doesn't come out of DSRM? So it keeps on booting into DSRM.
Yeah, in that case, you have to, you can take this up with support, because what we actually do is we do a BC edit. And I don't know if you have and I don't know by heart as well, but what we do is we change actually the boot flags when we do the backup. And again, that's also a known issue for 9.5, I think, without update 1. When you're running 9.5 update 1, they changed the behavior, how they push the machine in DSRM mode. And apparently in some cases, it does give that result. So I would take contact with support and say that you have that issue. I'm quite sure they can find it. I can see on our KB if I can quickly find it, but I'm not sure. Let's see, from KB. But if you actually update to update 1, this issue should also be resolved. So that would be, so let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so domain controller starts up in safe mode. Okay, so it's normal that it boots up in DSRM mode, but it should actually reboot. You can change it here and delete this value of save boot. But again, if you're running 9.5, they changed a bit the behavior, so make sure you're running at update 1. And if it keeps on happening, please make sure that you talk to our support and see what's happening. But I know that it was a known issue in 9.5, so please try update 1. It should be better. Okay, and then we got another one. Sander? Okay, Sander?
Yes, we do. We do. So we've got one last question is, does Veeam have any integration with VMware SRM?
So that's a good question. We actually do not. So we don't have a plugin for SRM. So the reason is quite simple, because we also have our own replication engine, but you can also make your own failover plan. And we're currently working on our own orchestrator that does similar functionality. So I don't, it goes a bit farther because it's a complete orchestration kit. But one of the things you will be able to orchestrate is disaster recovery. So if you want to have more information about that, Veeam availability orchestrator. But for me, that basically means that, for what I expect, because I'm not really a PM, that we will not add SRM in the near future. So you can see that we're working on that one. Okay. Okay, then I think we have all the questions.
Yes, we do.
In that case, well, for the guy that also has the issue with the SRM mode, it's somewhere on the forum as well. We're going to wrap it up, but go to our forums at veeam.com. If you can open a support case, they will assist you, but you can also find it somewhere on our forums as well. So, Sander, I do want to thank you for this awesome series. I think we created a lot of content. It was great working with you. Thank you for massively answering all those questions. I just opened the question box and I see that you had quite some questions that you answered, so thank you for that. Thank you for the first two. And then, of course, thank you, all of you, just for being in our webinar series. It makes it worthwhile to make this kind of series, to invest the time to create the decks, but also to research and so on to make the script. So thank you for being here. Hopefully you will come to our sessions again. Know that they are being recorded, so if you want to replay them later, you can actually find them on our website. Okay, Sander, thanks, mate.
Thank you. Good teamwork.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.